Hello and welcome to Moving Through Menopause. I'm Philippa, and joining me today I've got Natalie McKenzie. She's a cognitive rehabilitation therapist and a certified brain injury specialist trainer. Golly, Natalie, that's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it?
Yes, it does. You can shorten it to a few letters, but we like to keep it
Nobody,
like
nobody would understand that if we said that,
no,
would they?
no, exactly.
Well, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to be learning more about cognition and menopause, and also we'll be maybe thinking a little bit about fatigue as well, because I know for a fact that that's something that really floored me when I was perimenopausal. Before we dive into our topic, though, please everybody follow Moving Through Menopause, the podcast on Apple Podcasts, to really help us to all master this menopause transition. So, Natalie, thanks for coming along and having a chat today. I'm really looking forward to diving into this topic because of all the things that I talk about, the brain sort of frightens me the most. And I think you said that this is something you could talk about all day. So I'm really excited to hand the conversation over to you. And so why not, first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So I run a brain injury rehab service down in Kent, but we cover all over the UK. So my primary work is around rehabilitation for people that have had brain injuries. We tend to work at the kind of severe end of the spectrum, and we support people with relearning skills that have been lost as a result of a brain injury. And I've done that for over 20 years. Long time. So my background is in psychology. I've got a psychology degree and a master's in cognitive neuropsychology. I am all about brain stuff. My whole career has been brain injury, but I also run another kind of online group and membership type approach where I provide support and education to people with a wider spectrum of brain injuries, from mild, moderate, so more concussion-based things, and neurological disorders, chronic illnesses. And I'm a cognitive rehab therapist, which means I love anything to do with cognition. The way that we think and behave basically is my area, and why we learn a lot from the damaged brain about how a non-injured brain works and what happens when there's issues with the endocrine system and hormones. And I have a particular interest as well in women, brain injury, cognition, concussion, ADHD, and all the stuff that messes with the brain chemicals that mean when we hit a certain age, it all goes a little bit topsy-turvy. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, thank you so much for that. It really can go quite topsy-turvy. And I know that some of the things that women are dealing with in terms of cognitive challenges, brain fog, memory. I said memory, classic. And, the thing, spatial awareness, that was something that I really struggled with. I actually reversed my husband's car 3 times into a different lampposts, in actual fact. Yeah, he loved me for that.
Wow,
when I was in perimenopause, it was like my whole spatial awareness was totally off. And bumping into things, sort of walking into cupboard doors, and honestly, that was the truth of it. That was why I had those bruises. I was walking into things.
It seems like that people don't realise, do they? And that kind of impact on, that I can never say the word, even though I say it all the time, proprioception, as to where you are in space and your ability to kind of know where you are and bumping into things and moving too quickly, and your brain literally not being able to keep up with the speed at which you want to go. And then all the impact on what we call the vestibular system, which is where you are in space and how you move, and that sense of balance and things. And we talk about that a lot in brain injury, especially in concussion and any type of brain injury, to be fair. But yeah, things like that you hear about in menopause and perimenopause are all due to the fact that the brain isn't quite working as well as it was, because of all of the issues that are happening with the changes in hormones and the impact that has on our neural networks and how well they fire and how smooth they are and how efficient they are. It has a big impact. But we don't tend to talk about it at that level. We just talk more about the kind of overall cognitive dysfunction. So you've said that fogginess, memory issues, word finding, attention problems, you know, things like that. And that, for me, attention's a big thing for me in when we talk about cognition, because it's the basis of everything, really.
Oh, okay. The ability to sort of focus on something, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so we have the attention system. If we have kind of like a triangle of cognition, attention sits at the bottom as the base. So lots of people will presume that they've got a memory issue, when actually, if you have an attention problem, and I don't mean things like ADHD, that's a separate attention issue, but if you have a problem with your attentional system, you're not attending to the information. So you effectively don't have anything to then go through the memory encoding and storage. So people will say, oh, I've got a terrible memory, I don't remember what you just said. Actually, you didn't attend to what somebody just said, because of there's errors going on in that attentional system. So yeah, it is quite straightforward when you break it down.
Well, you say that. It sounds anything but. When we start to talk about neural pathways, honestly, it gets quite complex. So, yeah, I like that idea, though, because memory, feeling like your memory is letting you down, really undermines people's confidence in themselves. And if we think that part of it is actually that we're not attending, as you say, to the information, then there must be strategies that you can employ to facilitate or to assist in being more attentive, I suppose.
I mean, for me, awareness is probably the biggest key to it all. So when I work with people with brain injuries, it's a little bit harder, because you can have actual damage to those attention pathways. What tends to happen in things like perimenopause and menopause, the changes to the receptor networks, as it were, the science bit, the changes to the way that your brain uptakes chemicals and the way the chemicals behave in your brain impacts the circuits. So that then impacts the processes and how well they work. I like to kind of make it more straightforward by thinking, prior to these changes that happen inside the brain, your neural circuits are like motorways. They work really efficiently and fast. The quickest way of getting somewhere. They're fuel efficient, they're energy efficient. But when there's changes inside the brain from a hormonal perspective, or an injury, whatever the changes may be, you then are almost on more B roads. You're on diversions. They're a bit more frustrating. They're slower. There's more traffic jams. You get annoyed with people on B roads, all of that sort of thing. So in order for us to be more capable or more attentive, as it were, part of the biggest thing, like I just said, is being aware that that's what's happening from a cognitive perspective, and making sure that you're kind of, sounds a bit soft, but just being a bit fairer on yourself in terms of the environments that you're in. So noticing potentially that if you're in a busy environment, you may not attend so well. If you're doing two things at a time, you're potentially not as attentive on what you need to be, and just slowing things down, which is frustrating for a lot of women who are busy, mothers, working, juggling, doing all the things that we do, juggling everything. The thing is, you're used to spinning lots of plates, and you spin them well on a motorway. But when you've got these hormonal fluctuations, you don't have the capacity to do that anymore. So you do need to try and be more aware of those kind of environments. And for many people, it's busier places, when more people are talking, when you're doing divided tasks. That's the other thing, trying to keep it as simple as possible. But attention, we have different types of attention. We've got our focus, concentration. Something's just thrown itself around the back of my office. You've got your attention and concentration. You've got your divided attention, so the ability to divide between two things that you're doing. You're switching attention, so going from one task to another and not forgetting in between. So, like classically kind of cooking something, going off and answering the phone and coming back to things like that. So just knowing how complex the systems are and realizing that when you don't have such good circuitry or slowed circuitry, the errors may happen, and just being a bit kinder to yourself and realize, I think you touched upon it just now, you know, it's when you don't have trust in your cognitive skill and you find that you're forgetting things, and the frustration that you have, or the sense of failure from a cognitive perspective, that just adds another overlay that you don't need, which then impacts things like fatigue. It all stacks each other.
Yeah, that is it is sort of cumulative, and especially when we start to feel frustrated or fearful, in fact, because, you know, fear is a whole another inhibiting sort of has inhibiting effects, doesn't it, on memory and cognition? Because if we're in the process of running away, the blood's going to be diverted to the muscles away from the brain, and so fear really doesn't help us under those circumstances. It's easy to say, but like you say, the awareness and knowing that this is something that happens and it isn't just you and you're not going crazy. If we can sort of de-escalate that scenario and take some of the fear out of it and say, okay, so now we know this is something that's happening to lots of women. Maybe they just didn't realize it or talk about it to anybody. And now we know that, then we can start to break it down and have some coping strategies around, as you suggested. So, I mean, I think this is the biggest thing, that if we can just reassure people that they are actually quite normal under most circumstances. Now, you mentioned something about brain injury. Obviously, you deal with this all the time. And I kind of understand from my research that menopause is a time when things can present themselves that maybe we weren't aware of before, because the magnifying glass is on us at this time. So it kind of highlights. Now, that can be something women are getting diagnosed with ADHD around this time, but you said that it may be that once upon a time we fell off a horse, banged our head, got concussed. I mean, of course we're all falling off horses, aren't we, left, right and centre, but it could have been a bicycle. I mean,
or a fall, bang on the head from a boot, a trip, a fall, anything really. We're much more aware, well, we're trying in our world to be much more aware of the impact of things like multiple concussions. So potentially if you've had one fall, might not have caused that many long-term issues, but we now know that there's a big impact to things like multiple concussions, which could occur if you've been playing sport. If you have done contact sports, there's lots of research about women in rugby and the impact of those repetitive, not necessarily head injuries, but the fast hits that might not even impact the head, bangs on the head, trips, falls. The more you have of those, the more cumulative effect it has, and this cascade of change inside the brain, which can longer term have an impact. And we know from research now as well that women are more prone to potentially have more severe outcomes from brain injury, depending on where they are in their cycle, when they sustain a brain injury, concussion or not, where they are in terms of menopause, perimenopause, puberty. That can have an impact on how the brain reacts to a brain injury. Women as well, our head moves differently because of our neck strength in comparison to men. So when women have a car accident, our head moves differently. Women in sport, as I said earlier, they've done lots of studies on women in rugby, and the way that women fall when tackled is quite different, because our cervical spine is designed to be more fluid and malleable for child rearing, but what it doesn't do is set us up well for kind of an impact. So the way that our brain moves inside our head is different. It can impact our neurons and cells more severely, which is great. It's great being a woman, isn't it? We get lots of different lots of different impacts. And how women recover as well. So I see it with clients all the time. So people's symptoms, cognitive deficits, fluctuate during their cycles. They fluctuate when they go through menopause. I get lots of women coming to me who maybe have had concussions during menopause or post-menopause, and their cognitive abilities are different. I work within ADHD as well, and as you touched upon, women that are kind of coming out of menopause or finish having their children, and they're getting diagnosed with ADHD. Potentially yes, but potentially there's other things going on as well. So it's all connected.
It is a veritable minefield, as you say. That I can speak to this a little bit, because I had quite a nasty concussion at having a skiing fall. Somebody knocked me over from behind, and I hit the ground. And sadly, it was just before helmets were so very popular, and so I was definitely concussed for about a week after that. I really was not quite myself, shall we say. Now, to be honest, I didn't really think anything of this, but it's important, if we're looking at a person in a holistic fashion, that we take into consideration the history of this person's lifespan, really, not just that, this moment in time, but the things that have happened to us. Trauma as youngsters, for instance, emotional trauma, whatever it might be, like you say, taking football headers by the bucketful, whatever we've been doing in our younger days, all of this, our life experiences contribute to the people, the person, the biology, the physiology that we've got when we are then ultimately perimenopausal and menopausal. So this is, again, another layer that hadn't really occurred to me, to be perfectly honest. So I'm really happy that we're exploring this now. There's obviously a sort of state of being that is what subclinical, I suppose, is what I mean. But that means that we're sort of normal, and doing normal things to help ourselves is okay. But there's also the point at which we need to seek support and assistance. And I know that you do cognitive assessments. And I suppose, there are some online things that we can do, are there, like screening tools to say, have I got a problem, have I not? In which case, do I seek help? You're rolling your eyes. What? Tell me.
Oh, I'm not rolling my eyes. I think it's the internet's a wonderful place, but it's also a very dangerous place, isn't it? And I think, you can go on there and have lots of issues that you didn't know that you had before you went and searched a particular thing,
Yeah. Well, that's it. Yeah.
It's a blessing and a curse, isn't it? And yes, there are. So I do cognitive health assessments that are on a platform that is highly evidence and research based. It's being created by hosts of neuropsychologists, neuropsychiatrists, neurologists to look at kind of cognition and the wide spectrum of cognitive skills that we all have. And they're very useful in terms of providing baselines of where you're at. They can aid with therapists and the medical profession looking at what type of interventions and treatment people need. They're good for looking at dementia, age-related decline. But they're also just a really good way of just giving people more of an insight, because we talk about mental health and physical health, but people don't really think about their cognitive health, apart from we are more aware, particularly women, of how our cognition changes during our hormonal changes. There are things that you can do that kind of go on and say, you see them in the paper, don't you? If you can spot this odd one out within 16 seconds, your IQ is in the top 1%, that sort of thing. Almost isn't it? But we all know, and I know our bodies and our brains better than anybody else. It's the same, if you're noticing that there's a change and you can't put it down to an increase in stress, or maybe because your sleep has been impacted, or other people as well start to notice that there's a change in your cognition, it is important to seek support and advice about that. Could be nothing, could be a whole host of things, but we know our brains aren't designed to cope with the world as it is in terms of its busyness, let alone the impact of hormones. Our brains were designed to kind of stay alive, basically, and it's developed over time. Our frontal lobes have got bigger and bigger and bigger and folded across over themselves in order to accommodate the needs that we have from a cognitive perspective. But we work too quickly, we work too fast, we're too busy, we're too reactive, we're too responsive, and our brain literally can't keep up. You then add on these changes to the way our brain uptakes and deals with hormones, and it's not surprising that errors happen and changes occur, but there could also be other things going on. So as you already pointed out, the medical profession needs to be more aware of a person's history, what's happened in childhood, have there been any bangs to the head at all? Is there any history of genetic changes in terms of early onset dementia, Alzheimer's, things like that? And I think sadly, and I'm sure lots of listeners will attest to this, that these questions just aren't asked. They're just, there's still this, there's a woman of a certain age saying that there's certain changes, and all too often people are just given an antidepressant as a fixer-upper, or told to sleep more, or told to go for a walk more. All the things that we know, but I think it is important to just be more aware. That's why I'm big. That's why I would like people to have more insight into their cognitive health earlier in life. So kind of, doing these baselines earlier so you can see where change happens. But it's you've got to be careful as well not to be hypervigilant, because there is natural change anyway. And I think going back to what you were saying earlier, when you start to notice things and you become hypervigilant, you start to have that kind of confirmation bias, don't you? That well, I told you these things are happening because of X, Y, Z, when actually there's a lot of just natural change and errors that happen anyway, but we can become fixated on it, which impacts our mood, increases anxiety, puts that limbic reactive fight or flight response in, which in turn impacts our cognitive function.
So yeah, I mean that is very interesting, because I think that applies to so many things, that there is a sort of middle ground where not doing anything and getting too fixated, at the ends of that spectrum. And then there's the middle ground, which is a healthy amount of respect for brain health. So to, and also there are probably some general management strategies or preventative strategies that we can all benefit from. And you said walking outside. And we know that walking, the evidence is that this is something that is really good for our brain health overall. So, I think if you are feeling that things are just not quite as good, but it's not to the point of needing intervention or support, then just some common sense management strategies, like you said, walking. And are there others? I know there's some people who are doing Wordle religiously, or Scrabble. I don't know.
They're good. So things like that, those what I would term as low level cognitive practices, they're good for just keeping things going. The best thing we can do for cognitive health is to learn new things. You're literally never too old to learn. The brain is so clever, the neuroplasticity of it. We now know that there isn't a time necessarily that you stop growing growing cells. We do. So the part of our brain that is responsible for memory and learning, the hippocampus, is where cells are born. That's where they come out of, literally and not literally. Just very, very simply.
Yes.
But learning is one of the best things we can do for cognitive health. So the things that we do repetitively just to keep things ticking over, those games, Sudoku, word searches and things, they're good for just cognitive, just kind of keeping it going. The word evades me. See, I've got my word finding difficulties today. I haven't wordled. Keeping it kind of base. But the thing that enables us to grow these new pathways and to strengthen things is learn a language, learn a musical instrument. And if you can do it in a social environment, all the better. We know from studies on rats that rats that learn in groups retain and attend to information better than animals that learn on their own. We are social beings. We learn we need to be around people. We weren't designed to be on our own. And obviously what happens as people age, and there can be a tendency to remove ourselves from social settings, fatigue, anxiety, loneliness, there's death of a spouse or things. And that can have a big impact on our cognition. You know, we need to be around people, we need to socialize. And we know again from research that socialization is good for cognition. It keeps us on our toes, it keeps us thinking, it keeps us responsive, it aids our kind of problem solving, conversational skills. I did an interesting piece for Sewing Magazine about how good sewing is for cognition. You know, I can break down any hobby into why it's good for cognitive skill, but generally anything that you're doing that's getting those new kind of cells firing and wiring together, it is going to be good from a cognitive perspective. And then sleep, common sense. Sleep is impacted by things like menopause, but sleep is king or queen. It's the thing that we need to focus on. And I think lots of people will think, oh, well, my sleep is just so poor, so what's the point? You know, I can't do anything about that. Not strictly true. It might have changed, but again, it's having that awareness that as we age, our sleep patterns change anyway. Hormones will impact it, but I don't think people often realize that as you go through different stages of life, your sleep needs change, because the way that your brain needs sleep is different as well. So we just assume that, oh, I'm not sleeping because of this. Well, actually, there can be a natural change in the stages of sleep that you need.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing so true as everything's always changing. So we can apply that to that. I know that for me, sleep was evading me for quite some time around menopause, and I was struggling dreadfully with fatigue. And I mean, there's no doubt that was related to the fact that I wasn't sleeping. And so, you know, fatigue is something else that you have up your sleeve, fatigue management. And I know that this is something that you talk about in the context of brain injury, but is it something that you can talk about for anybody?
Yeah. So I wrote the Fatigue Management Journal, which is predominantly for people with brain injury or neurological disorders, because a lot of it is education around what's happening inside the brain and why fatigue is so high from a circuitry perspective. But the principles remain the same for everybody. And as I said a little while ago, our brains aren't really designed to be in this busy world, and we do just need to pace better. We need to plan things, pace them, prioritize them. So I teach people how to do that from a brain injury perspective. But as I say, just as taking stock and actually coming back to basics and thinking about what's important to us, prioritizing our tasks is one of the biggest things. Delegating to other people is important. And that can be difficult if you've got a busy life and maybe you're not in a supportive relationship, or there's some other things that get in the way of being able to delegate. It's not always practically possible, but there are often things that we can do that are quite simple, that we don't need to do it all. And being aware of kind of what our expectations on ourselves are, that's a big impact. You know, just realizing that maybe you do need to slow down a little bit. You have to prioritize self-care more than maybe you did. So in the journal, I teach people how to actually plan over the course of a week. So actually look at what your kind of cognitive and fatigue battery demands are, and actually looking at how you plan further ahead. Lots of people just think about their days as what they need to do. People don't look further ahead. And what people don't do as well is reflect. So we all know now that things like journaling are more people are more aware of it, and it's kind of a bit more fashionable to journal now rather than, you know, just Dear Diary like it was as a teenager. But we know from research as well that things like reflective practice and journaling is very beneficial, especially on things like mood. So actually taking time to reflect on how a day has gone, how you're feeling, thinking about how well you slept, logging how hydrated you were, keeping an eye on your diet and food, and actually noticing whether or not there's an impact from certain foods on fatigue and energy levels, but looking at that with a bit more of a microscope without being over microscopic. Again, back to that middle ground, kind of just taking time to reflect. And then, as I say, planning things more. For me, one of the biggest things people need to look at is identifying what their triggers and vulnerabilities are around fatigue. Do you get more fatigued in busy environments? Do young children make you more fatigued? Are you okay on, say, 6 hours sleep, but potentially 5 is not enough? How are you resting and recharging over the course of the day? Or are you just going bang, 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 getting everything done and collapsing at the end of the day? Things like that. So actually spending a couple of weeks tracking what you're doing, how you're feeling, what types of things make you feel worse and what type of things make you feel better. I mean, that's one of the biggest things. So that, what is it that recharges you? Lots of people assume just a good, 40 winks does the trick, but there's lots of things you can do that are actively restful and active recharges. Things like yoga, mindfulness. One of the things that lots of my clients like, things like mindful coloring, because it's active. Because people perceive, we're still stuck, sadly, in people perceiving rest as being lazy, because, like I said, the social beliefs is that you should always be doing stuff all of the time. People can think, oh, well, if I'm having to take a break, people can think I'm being lazy. So when you reframe that into more active, obvious rest and recharge, it can just change that a little bit. So then you don't have that emotional overlay that makes you think that you're not achieving, which then adds that next layer onto fatigue. So, being aware of that cycle and all the parts. So you've got your cognitive fatigue, your physical fatigue, and your emotional fatigue. They all stack on top of each other. And it's often the emotional fatigue that is the thing that ends up spilling over. And then we're back in limbic fear, and we're back in that cycle again. So just taking yourself out of those stackings.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Some great tips though, and I think certainly when I was exhausted, which I was for about 7 years as it goes, it was quite a long time. I definitely set the timer to go and lie down, and I called it meditating. Well, I mean, I was meditating, but if I happened to fall asleep, then that was my body telling me I needed to have just a little bit of rest, because, and if I didn't, then I was meditating. You know what I mean? So, the idea that if we didn't have artificial light, for instance, then, for half of the time in the winter, we wouldn't be able to do very much at all, would we? Whereas nowadays, it's stimulation, constant stimulation, devices, blue light, you name it. It is, as you say, totally not what we were designed for. So if we can sort of, rather than railing against it and saying, no, this is the way it's got to be, to create a bit of balance. I do favour the middle ground as a general rule. Create a bit of balance. We've got to be busy in our jobs, and but this is a skill actually, to be purposeful about nurturing the body and the mind with adequate amounts of rest. Whether it's through the day, or maybe you set aside some time on the weekend for this, when you've got a little bit more time. Perhaps some people meditate first thing in the morning. They know they've done it, they get it out of the way, and that's really speaking to hormones, isn't it? The stress hormones that can really play us like a fiddle if we're not careful. So, using movement as medicine, that's the thing that I absolutely preach at every opportunity. But yoga in particular can be very therapeutic and meditative as you move, and it can be gentle and still be worth doing. So don't beat yourselves up if a few gentle stretches feels like all you can manage. Then knock yourself out and do that, because that's your body telling you that it would help you to do those things. Your journal sounds fabulous, and I know that having a structure helps some people, to actually do the task. But given a blank sheet of paper, where does one begin? Whereas if you've got a framework, if you've got some suggestions, then I think we're much more likely to be able to do these things, aren't we? So
yeah, definitely. And we know that good old fashioned writing things down is one of the best things that we can do. Again, I'm always research heavy. We're 42% more likely to do something when we write it down than when we don't. And if somebody told you that you were 42% more going to be 42% more successful in something by doing something simple, you would do it. But people, it's kind of like, oh no, why would I do that? I've got an iPhone.
Oh yes, so the difference between handwriting is what you're talking about, actually, isn't it? Yeah, not just tapping it out on the phone, but this bit of calligraphy.
Yeah, we know that it aids learning. We've done studies on it. Go back to basics and kind of realize that that's okay. And that is, just slow. We've got to slow down and look after ourselves and move, get outside, get under that big ball in the sky, obviously with suntan lotion when it's very bright. But, things like that, people don't realize that you just, for good sleep and good pituitary function, being outside for some point every day is important, and people don't do it. They see it as a luxury or a not need to have. But it is about building those good habits and stacking those habits. And, I think a lot of people, again, goes back to what I was saying, they see it as lazy and a bit maybe self-centered, a bit of self-care because of the way we live now. But you don't have to do loads to make those small improvements and just build those good habits. And they do work. We know that they work. And often the simple things are the most effective.
And, most of the things that we've been talking about are healthful things in so many other ways, for the muscles and the joints, never mind the brain. So if we're doing, if you think that doing something like this, getting outside in the fresh air and taking a few thousand steps every day is good for us on so many levels, then I kind of think it's, because it's a win-win, I'm more inclined to do it. And as you say, your active rest feels, I've got some sewing to do actually upstairs. You mentioned sewing.
Get it done. Get those cognitive pathways firing. And it's I laugh when I talk to people about this, and they all say, "Oh, brilliant! Now I can go and tell my husband that I have to do this because it's good for my cognitive health." It is so. It is. If you can try and think of all the complex things that your brain has to cope with things like sewing or learning an instrument or crocheting, anything that kind of gets those fine motor movements going as well, they're all beneficial, and we need to be focusing more on what we can do to preserve and prolong our cognitive health, both through menopause and beyond.
Yeah, thank you for that. I shall definitely drink herbal tea to that.
Excellent.
Anything else might impair my cognitive function. So, well, thank you, Natalie. this has been a fabulous, fabulous insight into the working of the brain, the working of the mind, and those little tips, small tips that we can incorporate into every day, just brief interventions that people can use to improve the way that they think and feel. And this is just invaluable. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And do tell me, where can people find you and to work with you? Where would that be?
They can find me on Instagram and Facebook as the Brain Injury Therapist, and also on my website, which is braininjurytherapist.co.uk, where you can contact me or find out more about the services I provide and cognitive health assessments.
Well, that's fabulous. Thanks so much. I'll put that in the show notes. So do check out the links in the show notes to find out more about Natalie and all the amazing work that she's doing. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast today. Please follow me on Apple Podcasts, the Moving Through Menopause podcast, and share this episode with a friend. They might just need some support and assistance, and you never know, this might be just what the doctor ordered. So thank you again, Natalie. It's been wonderful to meet you, and I look forward to following more of your work. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.